My name is Tyler Seaman, and I am the chairman of Young Americans for Freedom at Gettysburg College, where I am a senior studying political science and German. Before I introduce Dr. Davies, I wanted to share a little about myself and my final academic year with you all. To alleviate any eye rolls from my chapter, I'll do my best to keep it short and get to the point. Right after my freshman year, I sought out and ultimately interned on Capitol Hill for my hometown congressman, and I absolutely loved it. I attended YAF's Buckley breakfasts, went to work, and finished it all off with my first National Conservative Student Conference. Needless to say, I was hooked on politics. I have no doubt in my mind that my participation in the YAF programs added extraordinary value to my experiences. The leadership and interpersonal competencies, confronting adversity, and often lively debates prepare YAFers to go off and do great things in our nation and in the world. Indeed, you, yes you, are the inheritor of a great tradition. Never doubt that you can succeed. All you need to do is ask. Now, enough about me, and on to the main event. Dr. Anthony Davies is currently Director of Economic Research at a financial institution in Washington, D.C. Prior to this, he was a tenured professor of economics and statistics at several universities, where he taught at the undergraduate and PhD levels. His educational videos have tens of millions of downloads on YouTube, and his weekly podcast, Words and Numbers, has more than 350 episodes and 2 million downloads. Dr. Davies was Chief Financial Officer at Parabon Computation, founded several technology companies, and is co-author on a patent for distributed supercomputation. He earned his BS in economics from St. Vincent College and PhD in economics from the State University of New York at Albany. Please give a warm YAF welcome to Dr. Davies.
Good afternoon. I want to talk about a topic that my co-author, James Harrigan, and I cover in our book, Cooperation and Coercion. And that is, whenever human beings come together, we organize ourselves in one of two ways. Either via principles of coercion, where some person or some people are in charge and they tell other people what to do, or via principles of cooperation, where we come together and voluntarily choose to do things, and if it works out, that's great, and if we don't like it, we walk away. Every human interaction falls under one of these two categories. Now, think about cooperation, for example. We'll have this guy, we'll call him Naked Guy, and Naked Guy says to himself, I'd like a suit, and I have money to pay for a suit. And along comes somebody else. We'll call this the guy on the left. And the guy on the left says, or the Naked Guy says, I'd like a suit. And guy on the left says, well, I've got a dress. And Naked Guy says, no, dress makes me sad. I want a suit. Now, under principles of cooperation, the guy on the left has an incentive to go off and find the thing that Naked Guy wants and bring it back to him. So he comes back with the suit. And Naked Guy says, yes, suit makes me happy, and they exchange money for suit. And Naked Guy is happy, and guy on the left is happy, and there's no problem. This is cooperation. Now, let me pause here for a second, because often when people look at economic transactions like this, they only see half the picture. They see the guy on the left who walks away with dollars. And we have a tendency to say there's some inequality here because guy on the left has dollars and Naked Guy doesn't have dollars. And we're missing the entire half of the transaction, which is Naked Guy got the suit, a suit which he likes better than he liked the dollars. How do I know? Because under principles of cooperation, if either one of them considered themselves worse off, they'd walk away. The mere fact that they transacted this business indicates to me that both of them believe that they're better off. Right, so that's cooperation. Now, consider the same scenario under principles of coercion. So here we have Naked Guy, and Naked Guy says, I'd like a suit, and I have money to pay for a suit. And along comes the government, and the government says, you're naked, this is a problem. Here's a dress, put it on, give me your money. And of course, Naked Guy is sad. He doesn't want the dress. This is a common problem when we organize ourselves via coercion, and we call this the knowledge problem. And the knowledge problem is simply that the people who are making decisions don't have enough information to be able to make decisions for you that are better than you can make for yourself. This does not imply that somehow the decision makers are stupid or they're malicious. It's not that at all. It's simply that they do not and cannot have enough information to make better decisions for you than you can make for yourself. So knowledge problem is the first problem that arises with coercion. Second problem that arises, here's naked guy. Naked guy says, I'd like a suit. I have money to pay for a suit. And along comes guy on the left. Guy on the left has a dress. And naked guy says, no, dress makes me sad. I want a suit. Now, under principles of cooperation, guy on the left had an incentive to go off and find the thing that naked guy wanted, bring it back to him. Under principles of coercion, there's a new option available to guy on the left. And that is to summon the government and to say, look, I've got things that government wants. Now, in some societies, you actually can pay off government officials or regulators. We tend to frown on that in the United States, but there are other ways. You can deliver votes to the politician. Maybe you represent a voting bloc and you can say, we'll all vote for you if you give us what we want. Or perhaps you're a corporation and you can say to the regulators, look, at some point you're going to retire. It's good that we have a nice working relationship because I'll have a nice six-figure job for you that doesn't require much work. When you retire from government, you come work for me. So there's all sorts of ways that people, entrepreneurial people, can deliver things that politicians and bureaucrats want. So here we have guy on the left delivering something that government wants and says to government, all right, make this guy take my dress and give me his money. And of course, naked guy is sad. He's got a dress. Guy on the left, however, is quite happy. This is another problem we have. When we organize ourselves via coercion, we call it regulatory capture. That is, entrepreneurial people in a coercive environment have an incentive to figure out how to co-opt the regulators for their benefit. You want a good example of this? Walmart, for a long time, has been a supporter of increased minimum wage. You ever wonder why? I mean, think about it. If Walmart wanted to pay its workers more, it could simply just pay its workers more. Why would Walmart lobby the government to raise the minimum wage? And the answer is because Walmart largely already pays more than the minimum wage. Raising the minimum wage would not cost Walmart anything, but it would cost Walmart's competitors. And that's regulatory capture, influencing the regulators to your benefit. So we've got these two problems when we organize ourselves via coercion. The knowledge problem, regulators can't make better decisions for you than you can make for yourself. And regulatory capture, people have an incentive to co-opt the regulators for their own benefit. Let's talk about the knowledge problem. I'll give you a simple example. Think about driving, right? Imagine if we did driving via coercive principles. The way this would work is we would black out the windscreen, the windows on your car. Every driver would have a headset that's connected to some central location. The central location would be monitoring through cameras where your car is and what it's doing and so forth, and they would relay to the driver. Speed up, slow down, turn left, turn right. Now think about what sorts of information well-meaning central planners would have to have in order to pull this off. They'd have to know for every driver what's your destination, what stops you want to make along the way, who's in a hurry, who's not, what are the road conditions like, what are other drivers doing around you, right? And they would take all of this information and imagine the magnitude of what we're talking about. Suppose you're talking just a small, medium-sized city, 10,000 cars on the road, and each car faces 10 options, speed up, slow down, turn left, turn right, this kind of a thing. That's 100,000 decisions. By the time the decision makers make the decision, situations have changed. And so they radio to me, turn left, and I turn left, and by the time all the information has been processed, and they tell me turn left, and I turn left, there's now a truck here, and I run into it, and you've got a problem. And if you have trouble imagining that, think about Tesla and their self-driving cars. Tesla can't pull this off when they're just operating one car, let alone if they were operating all the cars. So what happens? When we drive, we don't drive via coercive principles, we drive via cooperative principles. Each driver takes in the information that's relevant to that particular driver, and you make decisions for yourself. Is it perfect? No. 40,000 Americans die every year in car accidents. That's the evidence of how imperfect it is. But as economists, we don't ask whether a system is perfect, we ask whether it's better than the alternative. And in this case, the imperfect system of letting drivers make their own decisions is far, far better than having regulators make the decisions for them. Now think about regulatory capture and how it fails. What you're seeing here are adjusted for inflation. The costs of the 6 most expensive wars the United States has ever fought. Of these 6 most expensive wars, only 2 of them actually involved soldiers and bombs and things you think of when you think of war typically. The most expensive war by far is the war on poverty. Adjusted for inflation, it has cost Americans about $23 trillion since we waged it starting in 1967. Now, the war on poverty has been subject to massive regulatory capture. It has become influenced by people who benefit from poverty programs. Who are those people? They aren't, largely speaking, the poor. This is a list of all of the federal poverty programs that are currently in existence. This is not a historical list. These are all active right now. When you ask the question, what do we do at a federal level to fight poverty? It's this. Now, I don't know the particulars of all of these programs. I do know one through secondhand information, Youth Build. A friend of mine was a director for Youth Build. And Youth Build takes federal money, builds low-income housing, but it does so using at-risk youth. So we're taking youth who have had run-ins with the law, and Youth Build teaches them trades, how to be a carpenter, how to be a plumber, how to be an electrician, and they build housing for low-income people. This is a wonderful program. You're getting basically 2 programs for the same dollar, helping the at-risk youth and building the low-income housing, right? So I'm not saying that these are necessarily bad programs. I'm simply saying this is all of the stuff at the federal level only that we do to help the poor. So it raises the question, how effective are these? What you're seeing here is the poverty rate in the U.S. going back to 1959. You can see that vertical bar there. That's where the United States literally declared war on poverty in 1967 under President Johnson. And since then, you can see the poverty rate has been pretty constant at about 18%. Now, be careful about poverty statistics for the same reason that you should be careful about inequality statistics. Neither poverty statistics nor inequality statistics are adjusted for the things we do to fight poverty and inequality. So when you see the poverty rate, this is the poverty rate that exists before we do any of the things that those 101 programs do. Here's the poverty rate that you get after you do all those things that the 101 programs do. And you can look at this, and you can say, okay, these programs, they've cost $23 trillion since 1967, but they have caused the poverty rate to decline from 18% prior to the poverty programs to 15% after. And so we can look at that and we can say there is benefit here. We reduce the poverty rate by 3 percentage points. Now, I claim that we could have done a lot better for even less money. There is a way we could have, for the first time in the history of Homo sapiens, completely eliminated poverty and done so for a period of 50 years running. And that is to cut a check to every poor person in the country for $10,000 every year. Not every poor family, every poor person. So you got a husband, a wife, and a kid, and they're living in poverty. That's $30,000 every year. Just cut them a check. Looking at the number of poor people who have existed from 1967 to the present, do the math. It turns out, adjusted for inflation, that would have cost us $19 trillion. Less than the $23 trillion we actually did spend. But we didn't fight poverty this way. Do you know why? Because of regulatory capture. To fight poverty this way would require nothing. The IRS already knows who's poor and who isn't, because by law we all have to file income taxes. The IRS already cuts checks to every household every year as a result of your tax rebates and all of that. For an additional $0, we could have implemented this second program and eliminated poverty 50 years ago. Not gone from 18 to 15%, but gone from 18% to 0. But we didn't do it because of regulatory capture. Because those 101 programs that we have employ hundreds of thousands of people. I'm not talking about the poor people they service. I'm talking about the middle class people who work in those programs. I'm talking about the regulators and the politicians who benefit from those programs existing. It's massive regulatory capture. And what does it cost us? It's cost us an additional $4 trillion versus the second program, plus a residual of 15% poverty. That's the cost of regulatory capture. So I've said some horrible things about coercion and how it fails. Cooperation, it turns out, also fails. It fails because of diversity. Some of us are smarter than others. Some of us are more attractive than others. Some of us are stronger than others. Some of us are more talented than others. Some of us are born into riches versus others who aren't. Some of us are simply more lucky than others. Because we are diverse in all these various ways, some of us will be able to impose harm on others. Coercion is how you prevent that. Cooperation unto itself opens the door for those of us who are stronger, brighter, better connected, richer, to exploit others. Coercion prevents that. So what's the answer? Do you go with the cooperative framework or coercive framework? And the answer is you use both of them, each applied in correct measure. You use coercion to prevent people from imposing harm, and you otherwise leave them alone to cooperate. That's why when we wrote this book, we called it Cooperation and Coercion, not cooperation or coercion. These are two tools that society can use. They're both good, provided you use them in the right ways. Go back to the example of driving. I gave it to you as an example of how coercion fails and how much better we'd be off if we just let drivers do their own thing. Except this is not an example of the benefits of cooperation. It's an example of the balance. Because it turns out we do use coercion when it comes to driving. We have traffic laws. The red light means stop, the stop sign means stop, and then you go. You got no U-turns and speed limits and all of this stuff. We use a balance of cooperation and coercion in driving. How do we use the coercion? To prevent people from harming each other. That's it. Otherwise, we leave you alone. It's almost the perfect balance. In fact, when do we get mad about traffic laws? It's not when we get mad because we have to stop at the red light. We get mad because we get a ticket in a 55-mile-an-hour zone that everybody knows should be a 70. And we get the sense that the law is not there to prevent us from harming each other. It's there to collect revenue for somebody. This is not a new thing, the balance of cooperation and coercion. This is Jefferson, a wise and frugal government which shall restrain men from injuring one another, which shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits. This is the sum of good government. In a very wordy way, what he said was, we need the right balance of cooperation and coercion. If you've enjoyed this, I highly recommend my podcast, Words and Numbers, and you can find it on all the podcast players, plus on YouTube, so check us out. I and my colleague, who's a political scientist, talk about all sorts of things that are going on in the world from the perspective of an economist and a political scientist. We have a few minutes if you have questions.
Yes, if, again, you'll line up behind Connor, who's behind the column. And then don't forget name, school, and a brief question.
Hi, sir. Thanks so much for speaking with us today. As I said before, I'm Tyler Seaman. I'm a senior at Gettysburg College. If you would kindly go back to this slide where it lists all of the various wars that, the most expensive wars.
You want to see the 101?
Correct.
Let's see, it comes up. Oh no, it's here. There.
So actually the one with the graph.
Oh, you want to see this one?
It's the one, it listed Vietnam and the World War.
Oh, that one.
Correct.
Hang on.
The bar graph. Yep. Okay, perfect. So you mentioned that it was World War II and Vietnam. Those were the wars that were actually fought with bombs and bullets.
Yes.
Now, the war on terror is not highlighted in orange. Could you tell me a little bit more about why the war on terror doesn't fit in with those two wars?
Yeah, the war on terror, in there, I am not including spending on Iraq, Afghanistan, that going after bin Laden. This is the internal, the TSA and all the things that we do, the Border Patrol, this. I mean, not the Border Patrol in terms of immigration, but the Border Patrol in terms of terrorism.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, Dr. Davies. My
Hi.
name is Liam. I go to the University of Dallas. You suggested cutting a check of $10,000 to everyone in poverty. Well, I guess it's a two-part question. Were you just making a point, or were you suggesting that would be viable?
I'm pointing out that this is a simple solution that on its face would have done far better than the 101 programs. Now, it's not perfect because it introduces behavior that the other programs might or might not introduce. So it comes with its own problems. But the mere fact that I could show you something so simple that is A, cheaper, and B, even if I'm wrong that it took us to zero, it's clear it's going to take us way better than 15%, indicates to me that there's a lot more we could do here that we aren't doing. And we aren't doing it because of regulatory capture. That is, the people who are the regulators, the politicians, the people who work here have an incentive to maintain poverty. Now, I'm going to tread very lightly when I say this. I'm not saying that everybody here is just, cheering for the fact that we have poor people. I am saying that the people involved here, their paychecks depend on poverty continuing. And any solution that would not involve, any solution that would be a threat to their paychecks is going to be a non-starter.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Davies. My name is Madison, and I work here at YAF. And I have kind of a fun question. What's one economic misconception that you wish every college student could immediately unlearn?
I think one misconception I think that would set everybody on a better path is the misconception that wealth is about dollars. Certainly dollars are involved, but wealth is equally, perhaps even more so, about the goods and services. And so when we talk about the rich and the poor, or we talk about the haves and the have-nots in terms of inequality, we only look at dollars. We don't look at goods and services. Let me ask you, Steve Jobs, who basically invented or popularized the smartphone, dies with $8 billion in the bank. I presume nobody here has $8 billion. And someone who suffers from this problem, you could probably call it money illusion, would look at this and say there's great inequality because Jobs has $8 billion and we don't have $8 billion. How many of you has a smartphone? Everybody. And look at this. If you look at the smartphones, you've got near perfect equality. Everyone's got one. Except when we talk about inequality, we don't look at the goods and services. We look at the dollars. And so we end up in this biased situation where we think that the dollars, people who accumulate dollars are somehow taking something away from the rest of us and they need to give it back. We miss the fact that they got the dollars because we gave them because we wanted the goods and services. That's a very long-winded way of saying that's exactly what I wish everybody would know. And a lot of our arguments in this country about the wealthy and the poor and all of that would be mitigated, wouldn't go away, but they'd be mitigated if we understood this.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jake from the University of Central Florida. I just wanted to ask you if you were to give us one book recommendation to shape a conservative economic worldview, what would you say?
One book recommendation. All right. Who's in charge of these slides? Bring me back to my first slide. If I do this, you might not be able to do it. One book, that one, there it goes. Cooperation and Coercion. In fact, I brought 5 copies that they're going to give out. You can get this. Now, we wrote this it was published in 2020. So parts of it, this is only 2025, right? It's only 5 years later. Parts of it are severely dated, specifically the parts that have to do with the federal debt. But the principles that you see here all apply as much today as they did in 2020. So I would lead with this. 2 other books I would recommend. One is The Armchair Economist by Stephen Landsberg. And Landsberg does a similar thing that we do with cooperation and coercion. He's looking at the world around him through the eyes of an economist. And we draw a more unified framework between both economics and anthropology, the human beings and political science. He's straight up economics, but Armchair Economist. And then the last one I would recommend is Economics in One Lesson, Henry Hazlitt.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for coming to speak to us. I'm Max from London School of Economics, and I was wondering, what can we as a young generation do to prevent this regulatory capture from spiraling even further?
There's one thing that young people can do that I don't think anybody else can do, and it is hands down the one single thing that needs doing more than anything else. And that is encouraging civil dialogue. So long as our brothers and sisters on the left think that our brothers and sisters on the right are heartless and the other way we think they're stupid or whatever it is, we never sit down and talk in a respectful manner. Because there are many things that we in this room hold dear and true that are wrong. But we don't know what they are. The way we find out what they are is to sit down in civil discussion with our brothers and sisters on the left and talk to them, because they have answers that we haven't thought of yet, as we have answers that they haven't thought of. And I'm not drawing a picture of relativism where we're okay, they're okay, that kind of thing. No. There is objective truth out there, and the way you find it is by challenging your own thoughts. And the way you do that is you find someone who disagrees with you and have a respectful conversation. If your generation can pull that off, it sets the stage for solving all of the other problems.
Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Davies. My name is Alex Ball. I'm with Penn State. So you were talking about the debt, and last year having been that first year that we paid $1 trillion just in servicing the interest on our debt. I wanted to ask you what incentive structures are in place and currently exist that cause the debt to continue growing, and how can we incentivize people to actually want to address that problem and reduce the debt?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so a couple of things to keep in mind as you think about the debt and the interest. When you look up online interest on the debt, you will see a number somewhere in the 800 billion range. That number is incorrect. And if you look at the fine print, you'll see it's not interest on the debt, it's net interest on the debt. That is, it's the interest that the government has paid minus interest it has received. What you want to look for is the gross interest on the debt, and that is this year about $1.2 trillion. It is the second largest item in the budget after Social Security, and is coming up very close to Social Security. $1.2 trillion. The reason we have this problem is because we let the government out of its constitutional box. And this started in the 1920s in this country when we got the idea that there are certain things the government should be doing. The Constitution quite clearly says, no, the government can't do this, and we couldn't be bothered to go through the amendment process. So we just decided, well, the Constitution doesn't really say what it says. We should let the government do these things. And if you are skeptical of my claim, I refer you to Article 1, Section 8. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution lists 9 items. Those are the 9 items the federal government is allowed to do. If it's not on the list, it's not allowed to do it. And if you count, you will find, well, I just showed you a list of 101 programs that the government is involved in, right? And that's just on helping the poor. The government is doing way more than what it constitutionally should be doing. So it's escaped its constitutional bounds. And the reason it escaped its constitutional bounds is because of something that Jefferson foresaw. He was afraid that at some point in our future, the majority of Americans would discover that they could vote themselves largesse at the expense of the minority of Americans. And we did discover that, and that's what we've been doing. If you ask Americans today, should we cut the budget? My guess is you'd get 95% of Americans saying, yes, we need to cut the budget. But the budget doesn't get cut because then when you go into the next question, what do you want to cut? Now you have 300 million different opinions. And so we end up cutting nothing. In fact, what happens is your taxes become so high that you start to want back something for this money that you paid in. So I, as a politician, say, hey, elect me and I will grab some of that money from Washington and bring it back here where it belongs because all of you are being taxed too much. And you say, yeah, let's do that. But then multiply that by the 535 representatives in Congress, and all of a sudden you've got this going on, where we all have an incentive to get money from the federal government. We all want things cut, but we don't want our thing cut. We want the other guy's thing cut. And so you end up where we are now. Where does it end? Which would be the natural follow-up question. There is a way economically that we could get back to a balanced budget, and over the course of, and I'm not exaggerating, it would take about 90 years. Over the course of 90 years, we could get back to a not zero debt, but a well-managed debt. So it took us about 100 years, more than 100 years to get into this hole. It's going to take us about 100 years to get out. There's a way to do this economically. No big deal. Well, I shouldn't say no big deal. There's going to be some pain, but it's not going to be Armageddon pain. It's going to be a little bit of pain, right? Ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen because politically it can't. It is impossible politically to pull off what I'm looking for. Therefore, where we're going to end up is monetization. And you see the beginnings of it already. If you follow what's going on with the Fed, inflation prior to COVID averaged about 2%. Since COVID, it's been averaging 3%, and the Fed can't get it any lower. It's not going to get it lower. In fact, my back-of-the-envelope calculation is that it's going to end up over the next decade, perhaps 2 decades, settling at around 7%. Why? Because the only option to us, we can't agree on what to cut from the budget. We don't like our taxes being raised, and footnote, raising taxes doesn't do much for you anyway. The only solution left is to print money, and that comes at the cost of inflation.
Thank you very much.
I'm Peter from Slovakia. Glad to be here. I want to ask, America is a free country, free market, free people, yet many young people seem to admire socialism. And are they just crazy leftists, or is there actually a real problem with the free market that we shouldn't ignore?
Can you repeat, please? Just summarize.
Okay.
This is not a you problem. This is a me problem.
Sure. In America, there is free market, free people, but there are many people who admire socialism.
Yeah. Okay.
And
that's what you said. Yeah, I got you now. Yeah, this is something that has puzzled me as well. And I know people who have lived in under socialist regimes, and I find this interesting thing that, largely speaking, people who are enamored of socialist systems are people who have never lived under a socialist system. People who've actually lived under socialist systems have very different ideas about the thing. And so I think what's happening here is a couple of things. One, in the United States particularly, we have become so ungodly rich that we've forgotten what it is to struggle. I'm not saying there aren't people in the United States who struggle. I am saying that literally what we call poor in this country, the rest of the world calls middle class. And that's by the numbers, right? Forget about $15 an hour. $7.25 an hour, full-time, is $15,000 a year. Take into account differences in cost of living across other countries and ask yourself, what is the median household income in terms of purchasing power on planet Earth? It's $16,000. Literally, what the rest of the world calls middle class, we call poor. We've become that rich. And because of that, I think two things have happened. One, we've come to take for granted this richness. We say, well, that's just the way things are. And the other thing that happens is we see, rightly so, problems. And we want to fix the problems. But we make the mistake of thinking the problems are the result of a free market system. And we look at socialism as an alternative. Well, socialism doesn't have these problems. Oh, yes, it does. It has them even worse than what we have. Give you a good example. I mentioned inequality a couple of times. Look at income inequality numbers sometimes for the most economically free countries and the least economically free countries. And you will see amongst the most economically free countries, there's income inequality, right? It's measured by the Gini coefficient. You can see it, what it is. And people point to that and say, that's the problem. With economic freedom, you get this inequality. Yeah. Look at the least economically free countries. Their income inequality is way worse. So that tells me the inequality is not you can't make it go away. So you look around and you see inequality and you say, well, this must be a capitalism problem. It's not a capitalism problem. It's a human being problem. And socialism isn't the answer. And the only reason we don't know it's not the answer is because we haven't tried it yet. God help us if we do. Well, or maybe not. That would be the end of socialism in this country.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you, Dr. Davies, for coming to speak today. My name is Acton. I go to Ole Miss. My question for you is, I've noticed a lot of states have raised their minimum wage. Do you actually have an argument against raising the minimum wage?
Yeah. When we talk about raising the minimum wage, we phrase it as a struggle between the employer and the employee. There's this employer, and we just need to freeze these dollars out of his hands and give them back to the worker. And that's not the conflict that's going on. It's not between the worker and the employer. It's between high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers. So let's suppose, for example, that the people on this side of the room are incredibly skilled people. They've got good work ethic, whatever it is. Whatever it is that employers look for in employees, you all have it, right? And over here on this side of the room, not so much, for whatever reasons. Okay? And I, as the employer, I'm looking to make profit, right? I'm in business to do this. And so I look at what my business does, and I say to myself, okay, my business makes these pads of paper, and each one of these pads of paper is worth $10 to me. And if you can make one of these an hour, I'll pay you $10. $10 an hour makes me money, makes you money, everybody's happy. Okay, what happens if the government comes along and says you can't pay your workers $10 an hour, you have to pay them $15? I'm not going to just all of a sudden pay you all $15. I'm going to look at you and I'm going to ask, which of you can make enough of these pads of papers to be worth $15 to me? And all of a sudden, it's these workers over here that look attractive to me. These, not so much. And notice what the minimum wage has done. These people think it's great because they went from $10 to $15. These people didn't go from 10 to 15. They went from 10 to 0 because that's what you get when the employer says, I'm sorry, you're not worth what the government's requiring me to pay you. When you start to look at it from that perspective, I have found you can convince people that the minimum wage is a property rights violation that falls most onerously on the less skilled workers. That if I'm a worker whose labor is only worth $10 an hour, and yeah, I'd love to make 15, but I'd rather make 10 than 0. And I say to my employer, I'll work for 10, and the employer says, I would hire you for 10. And the government comes in and says, no. I'm the one who's been harmed. Now, you can make all kinds of arguments about, well, but you can't live on $10 an hour. I got to get my foot in the door. I'm a low-skilled worker. Give me that shot. Let me build up some skills. Let me learn. Let me develop a pedigree that I can show other employers. I've done this, this, and this. You're not even letting me get my foot on the first rung of the ladder. Sorry, I'm preaching.
You're all good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for your time. Enjoy your weekend.